No! God, please, no! 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 No!
So a while back, I was going to review the newest Transformers: Rise of the Beasts, but I kept getting stuck on a much wider issue that has been plaguing Hollywood. When did special effects stop being special? This was a question often asked back in 2017 when Mad Max Fury Road came out, which had everyone proclaiming that true special effects were in practical application, real props with real stunts and real actors or stuntmen. Now there is some truth in that. Practical effects do age better, just by way of CGI technology improving over time and constantly getting better and better, making older technology look quickly outdated. While alternatively, you can't really outdate, reality. And yet even something like Mad Max Fury Road made use of practical stunt work and CGI composites, two technologies working in tandem. So I think things are a little more complicated in today's landscape. It's now been 7 years after Mad Max Fury Road, with some of the worst visual effects we have ever seen being released to theaters. It is well worth our time to start asking this question again. What happened to big special effects extravaganzas? How did we get to the point where a movie from 2007, 16 years ago, looked better than the stuff being made today? People familiar with my channel know that I'm especially hard on visual effects and calling out movies for what I consider to be CGI sludge. Say what you want about Michael Bay, but he knew exactly what he was making. When once asked why his movies are so bad, he responded, "Oh no, I make movies for 12-year-olds. What a crime." He just wanted to make stuff that a teen audience would walk out of the theater saying, that was cool. And he did, with some of the best effects that money could buy. You can get bogged down in the usual complaints as to how the story is crap and the characters shallow, but it knew that it was first and foremost an effects extravaganza. It put its money where its mouth was. This looks cool. This looks like a cutscene out of a halfway decent video game tie-in. And I can hear the keyboards already typing that I shouldn't be focusing in on only the visual effects in the movie. But come on, are you really going to a Transformers film for the story? Let's be honest here. The biggest draw of this franchise is the spectacle. It's why we are all here. And Hollywood is failing their tentpoles. Why is that? Technology has come a long way. How in over 15 years have we seemingly regressed? At the advent of film, the point of special effects was simple: to make the audience suspend disbelief and engage in the fantasy being presented. Go back early enough, and the only thing that they really had to compete against were stage play visuals. With creative compositing and mats, they could easily surpass anything that the viewers had seen before. Fast forward, and visual effects became something of this arms race, an attempt to make movie visuals more and more real, always hoping to hit that final goal of being inseparable from reality, where the audience looks at the screen and wonders, how did they do that? Or the effect goes completely unnoticed because it is seamless within the scene. From A Trip to the Moon to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea to Wizard of Oz to the light cycles of Tron to Jurassic Park, there was a real magic in seeing some effect that would just capture your imagination and just, blow your mind. But at some point, the arm race stopped. Like when the US made it to the moon for some reason killed the space race of the 1960s, so too has something stopped studios from continuing to push forward and innovate. They're no longer trying to make things look real, and they've kind of just settled on real enough. Now, I'm not claiming that there wasn't also a lot of movies in the past with bad effects. There were. Nor am I claiming that there are no modern movies with good effects. There have been a lot of great works. I'm simply making an argument that the bar for quality has significantly dropped. And why? Sure, you occasionally have a Nolan film with a focus on practicality, like when he used props and standees to create this army on a beach for Dunkirk, surreal sets for Interstellar, or spinning hallways for Inception. Or, the famous truck flip in The Dark Knight. Sometimes you'll get Mission Impossible, with Tom Cruise attempting to kill himself in an impossible stunt. But these are all pretty far and few between. Nowadays, we are getting absolute travesties, with something like The Flash, where producers have the audacity to release what looks like a half-finished film to theaters. How could they think that this is acceptable or okay for something that costs $300 million? Many are familiar with me for my Quantumania video, where I slammed the use of the volume to create an incredibly lazy movie that just threw sludge on screen and had no blocking whatsoever. So let's ask the question here of what killed modern special effects. And I could simply point to the usual culprits. Maybe we have gotten numb to visual effects. With modern CGI, anything can be created, anything in the imagination. And yet, occasionally, a movie can still come along and blow our minds. James Cameron has a history of delivering spectacle on a grand scale. Some may even say that he now focuses on that more than his stories. But you can't deny that Avatar did capture people's imagination and ushered in a new 3D craze for about 5 years. It's a craze that no studio really fully utilized outside of maybe How to Train Your Dragon, instead settling for cheap CGI conversions, in-your-face gimmicks, or uninspired utilization. It ultimately failed to push forward VFX technology as Cameron had hoped, as the fad relatively faded off in less than a decade. Could it be that we've just gotten to the best CGI is going to be? Or, effects improvements are just so small we barely now notice them. They're more incremental rather than towering achievements. Perhaps. But I'm not convinced. I think there will be another Terminator 2, Jurassic Park, Lord of the Rings, or Avatar that comes along and rocks our world. I could also do the popular thing and just blame the overworked VFX artists. And I'll be the first to say, well, maybe not the first. Probably someone said it at some point. But I will say that I think this is a cop-out. Not because they aren't overworked. They are. There's so many effects-heavy tentpoles, not to mention shows now, that require an army to get everything done on time. They are doing the best they can on a short schedule, and even then, they can turn out technological wonders like Thanos, or the Spider-Verse movies, or the dragons of Game of Thrones, all while sleeping under their desks for their art. No one can blame these artists who have a real passion for their craft. The easiest way always to find where things have gone wrong is to rewind the clock and take a look back at history. And don't worry, I'm not going back to 1910 filmography, because all the way up through the 2000s, visual effects were making leaps and bounds, going from Terminator 2 in 1991 with some of the first photoreal CGI to convincing character models in 2002 with Gollum in The Two Towers. Gollum holds up pretty well today with just a few shots in the light that don't really refract quite right, and extreme close-ups lacking the pores of models like Thanos and the Na'vi. Technology through this decade was constantly improving, so when did this special effects arm race just die? There is a franchise that can serve as a good barometer for the degradation and decline of art in real time, as this franchise was releasing at least one movie every year. We can track the change to visual effects and their approach in real time. Yes, it's our old friend Disney and the MCU. How did we go from the great-looking visuals in the modestly budgeted Iron Man to the complete disaster that was Quantumania? Looking back at Iron Man, for the most part, that film still looks pretty incredible. From the great practicality of the original costume to even the times when it is completely CGI, looking really lifelike with authentic smudges on the metal. But if we are being honest, the action is all pretty low-key. Iron Man is more of a character piece, which is pretty lacking on action in general. Perhaps that more limited sense of scale allowed the effects team to stay more focused on the limited CGI assets. Or maybe it was the practical costumes that helped serve as a reference to the artists, something dropped from later films as Robert Downey Jr. disliked the cumbersome costume. My point is that Marvel at this time was still going for realism. It wanted to hold the audience's suspension of disbelief. This held true across all movies in Phase 1, where they focused more on character, and action was scaled back, giving the CGI artists time to really focus in on a more limited workload. So let's fast forward to Phase 2. Avengers may have been shot like a TV show, but it gave us perhaps the most lifelike and convincing Hulk we've ever seen. The effects very much do still hold up, and after Avengers, they could expand the budget of their movies due to a massive bump in their franchise's respective box office returns. These movies all still look fantastic across the board. Guardians has CGI characters that still hold up today. Winter Soldier mixes practical stunt work and choreography with a comic book flourish. Even the less well-received Iron Man 3 and Thor 2 still hold up really well, at least visually. Surprisingly, the issues start to appear in Age of Ultron. And this is where the first villain of the story emerges: scale. Most of Age of Ultron still looks really solid. The Hulk looks better than ever in his fight with the Hulkbuster. It's just sort of, the chef's kiss and probably the best part of the movie. But in the third act, the cracks really start to show. From Iron Man lacking the correct shading or feeling physically present, or the swarms of Ultron bots lacking detail, it's not outright bad, but lacks focus. You feel corners starting to be cut. This is because even before the film came out, changes were starting behind the scenes as Phase 3 was ramping up production. In this phase, Marvel was looking to increase their slate of movies from 2 films a year to 3, which doesn't seem like a big jump, but it is a staggering amount of new effects shots. And it's in Phase 3 that all hell breaks loose. I want to keep in mind that we are talking strictly about visual effects, because by many metrics, people would consider Phase 3 to be the high point of the MCU in terms of their storytelling, characters, and impact on popular culture. But the scale of all these films had gotten so much bigger as characters were in their finales and going for bigger and better spectacular send-offs. The amount of effect shots thus increased to such an absurd scale that compared to Phase 1 and 2, it started to look pretty cartoonish, lacking proper shading and texturing on models. Just look at the Hulk from Avengers and Age of Ultron compared to his model in Ragnarok. Or who can forget the final fight in Black Panther where they basically turned into PlayStation 2 models. Or even compare Spider-Man's CGI from the Amazing Spider-Man franchise to his first MCU outing. It's a massive downgrade. You need only look at the detail on the lizard model between The Amazing Spider-Man and No Way Home. And I'm not here just to crap on the MCU. I'm actually a huge fan, but there is no denying that the CGI took a massive hit in this phase. Outside of Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame, all the movies in this phase looked worse in terms of VFX compared to the 2 phases that came before. So why didn't we hear more complaints back then? We were more forgiving. We were already invested in these characters and this world. The MCU was top of their game, and we were all jazzed about what was coming next. We were okay with letting it slide because we were already invested in the story, characters, world, and what we thought was around the corner. As I've said before, story is king. If you make a story good enough, I will forgive missteps, at least to a degree. But in something like Rise of the Beasts, where the whole point is the visual effects, while the story is very surface level, I feel far less forgiving. That's because you are only here to impress me with the visuals. And if you're not doing that, why are you even here? Our willingness to forgive lazy CGI is partially what made the producers and money pinchers feel like they could get away with it. Phase 3 of Marvel showed the producers that they could put out a movie with questionable effects, and if the hype was already high enough, it wouldn't matter and people would still show up. They started to cut corners. They could underpay, underhire, and overwork their VFX artists for inferior results and products, and no one would care. I didn't care when it was happening. I forgave bad visuals for Spider-Man because I got to see him hang out with Iron Man. I forgave bad visual effects in Black Panther because I authentically liked the action and characters. I forgave Doctor Strange for ripping off Inception at a bigger scale, but looking way worse years later because I liked the creative flair. I forgave Civil War and Infinity War for floating heads because everything else really did look pretty good, and those movies were just fantastic. And I forgave Ragnarok for looking like a Looney Tunes cartoon because it was really funny and entertaining. Keep in mind, all the movies I just mentioned, I still really like. The problem is not that Marvel compensated their bad effects with other elements. That's acceptable. What is wrong is that all of Hollywood took a lesson from this and thought they could give us tentpoles without any effort on the effects side. As they saw it, the bar had been lowered. If the audience would accept that quality from Marvel, why not make it the industry standard? So while everyone is blaming the effects artists and timetables and the volume or whatever, the real person who did this to us is kind of us. We enabled all the money-grubbing suits to pinch pennies and give us inferior products. We allowed them to give us CGI slop that just costs an insane amount of money and looks worse than anything from the early 2000s. We allowed them to put floating heads in movies and think, yeah, this is fine. We allowed movies to look like cartoons, video game cutscenes, and half-finished models. We did it. You and me. Our standards dropped and we got more forgiving. And I think it's time to stop, because Hollywood and visual effects are still capable of greatness when we let them. We can have Transformers models where they look like things are actually transforming and CGI artifacts are just not popping up out of nowhere. We can have superheroes that look real and convincing like in The Dark Knight and Iron Man, and not in The Flash and Blue Beetle. We can have convincing CGI worlds like in Dune and not in the terrible Quantumania. We can have models move with a real sense of scale and weight like in Pacific Rim and not, Pacific Rim 2. All it takes is for us to stop blaming the VFX artists because artists have done nothing wrong. Stop forgiving the producers and companies for knowing they can cut corners and we will just gobble it up. We should not have to rely on only the auteurs like Denis Villeneuve, James Cameron, Guillermo del Toro, and Christopher Nolan to deliver quality just because their personal standard of quality is higher. We need to demand it across all products. What is the point of a special effects extravaganza that isn't special? There is no point. And it is high time we stop just letting them get away with it. But those are just my thoughts on the current state of modern effects, and I hope I haven't been too hard on you, because I appreciate you all watching, and I hope you will return for more historical content and modern movie analysis. Thank you all for watching, and keep those reels turning.